Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi has used the COSATU Workers' Day rally in Brakpan, which was east of Johannesburg, to respond to a march organised by civil society groups. Lesufi said he supports the march and has appealed to President Cyril Ramaphosa to urgently pass legislation addressing illegal immigration. On Wednesday, Lesufi received a memorandum from several community organisations and political formations raising concerns about undocumented foreign nationals in the country. COSATU in KwaZulu-Natal has added its voice to the protests against illegal foreign nationals. However, the Trade Union Federation's secretary in the province, Edwin Mkhize, says such protests should be structured. Mkhize says COSATU has been involved in campaigns together with the Department of Labour and Home Affairs to tackle some of these problems. For more on this now, we're joined by political analyst Professor Andre Duvenage, who joins us now on the line. Prof, thank you so much for joining us. Look, you can tell there is quite a lot of discontent in the country at the moment and a frustration over the illegality of some of these foreign nationals in South Africa. Let me get your sense, first of all, what do you make of these civil society group protests on illegal immigration? Let's start there.
Good morning, Griselda, and your viewers. I think if we look at the nature of the problem, we are talking officially about 2.4, 2.5 million illegal immigrants. Unofficially, people are putting the statistics as high as 5 million. Some are talking about more than 5 million. The core areas of the problem is the major cities, specifically Johannesburg, Pretoria, as well as Durban and the related metropoles there, although the problem is also manifesting itself in other areas, but predominantly it is an urban phenomenon. And at the moment, before the build-up to the 2026 elections, which are going to take place on the 4th of November, there's a high level of political sensitivity about this issue. There's no doubt that this is a very important issue. It's also not a new issue. It has a long history. I think back in 2008, as many as 60 plus people were killed as a result of xenophobic tendencies. So this is becoming a huge problem, and with infrastructure in decay, with people not receiving services at a local level, and with these people becoming part of the social service network and making use of it, this is creating a lot of conflict on many levels. And we need to say that this is primarily black on black violence at the moment. And internationally, specifically from the side of Nigeria, but also countries like Botswana, there are strong reaction against South Africa internationally.
But does this show, Prof, a leadership vacuum? Because you talk about, what has been festering for a very long time. The words that we're hearing from South Africans on the streets today about, access to social services, which are already stretched. There've been protests about, the children of, foreign nationals getting places in schools. Favoured over, those are the words of the protesters, over South Africans in a system that is already stretched and that cannot accommodate everyone in the country at the moment. Is there a leadership vacuum, because this has been going on for so long, that was failed to be resolved when it should have been? That is why we are seeing this kind of frustration on the streets at the moment.
Griselda, without any doubt, it is a huge leadership vacuum that came over decades. In fact, we can take this back even to the period before 1994, but without any doubt, since we opened up the borders for Africans basically a complete lack of border control. We have seen a huge influx of people specifically coming from places like Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Lesotho, as well as big communities from Nigeria, as well as Ghana within South Africa. And they are using our schools, they are using our social systems, thinking about clinics, hospitals, and even the grant system if they receive full citizenship. And we know there are a lot of corruption. So this is a very complex problem. And there is indeed a complete lack of leadership and political will to deal with this matter in a
But
proper way.
why? But why then? Why is there this vacuum, Prof? Because what are we waiting for? It's a situation that has the potential, due to the anger of people on the ground, it has the potential to see a much more, much more conflict arise. And especially, as you've already alluded to this, I was about to get to it, when we head towards the local government elections, it's always a time when you have, locals or South Africans share their views about what bothers them most. What seems to bother South Africans at the moment is that we have a stretch system. They're told there are no jobs. If you go into restaurants, you will find that most of the people that are being hired there are individuals. We've seen the rates. And I'm in no way trying to be insightful here. We've seen the rates in these restaurants. There are undocumented foreign nationals who are being hired in these institutions. The Department of Labor has tried to do something about it. That has not helped. There's the issue of the schools. There's the issue of the hospitals and the clinics. You would even recall that I think it was one of the civil society organizations that took on the Limpopo Premier, now Limpopo Premier, Dr. Poppy Ramathuba, for utterances that she made regarding individuals that were in hospitals in that province, yet you have a system that simply cannot even look after its own people. I'm just stating the facts here.
Griselda, yes, you are indeed correct. I remember that issue in Limpopo very well. I think if we analyze the problem, there's a lot more at stake than only a leadership issue.
Yeah.
This is also a state in decay and a state without the necessary capacity to deal with this problem. And there's also a lack of political will to deal with this problem. And this has a bit to do with the political ideology of Pan-Africanism and Africa United and Africa for all Africans, that type of approach. So I think it's a combination of ideological reasons, lack of state capacity, and lack of the will to deal with this problem. And then we must also take into consideration, we're talking about anything conservatively 2.5 million. I believe it's closer to 5 million people involved here. They are playing a very important role in our economy. And in a way, they are part of what we see as economic growth. They also have an economic interest. They are also contribute to our economy. So in my assessment, there are two sides to the story. But the problem at the moment is this is creating high tensions in a society that are facing major challenges, and this is a recipe for conflict and violence in the build-up to an election that I believe can be the most important local government election since 1994. And this may create even extreme patterns of violence. We have seen some parties already mobilizing as part of this initiative against foreigners. We have seen the MK party as well as Action SA becoming involved in this process Earlier, I have listened to a person saying this is a social phenomenon. It may started off as a social phenomenon, but at the moment, it is highly politicized.
And without a doubt, Prof, this is going to be one of the key tools used, to mobilize support in the run-up to the local government elections. But I mean, why isn't there a conversation being had? Or perhaps this is already happening behind the scenes and we're not told. Perhaps even with the SADC countries, if we want to talk about Zimbabwe, we want to talk about Mozambique, why are these countries not coming together? South Africa is saying, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, leadership of those countries, let's come together, let's find a solution because we clearly have a problem here. South Africa is not going to be able to solve it on its own. It needs to speak to its neighbors and say, we need to sit around the table. Your citizens, if coming into South Africa, this is what needs to be done. But obviously, there's the issue of porous borders. I know that there's some great work that is being done by institutions like the Border Management Authority. We've seen the work that they've done, but it's not enough. The borders are just porous. It's a free-for-all. Everyone can come and go as they please. And I think without a shadow of a doubt, one can say that I don't think there are very few countries in the world that allow the kind of in and out that we see in South Africa, that South Africa allows, maybe not willingly, but there's the issue of the porous borders. It's just not working.
Griselda, your arguments are 100% right. In fact, I think to talk about borders in some way, now I'm talking about the South African state, is already an overstatement of the situation. Some of these borders have completely disintegrated in this process. And I'm glad to hear that the Minister of Interior Affairs has taken some steps to upgrade at least 6 or 7 of these border posts. But coming back to your bigger argument, why not negotiating with Mozambique and Zimbabwe and Lesotho? The problem specifically with regard to Zimbabwe as well as Mozambique is a problem that they are both, in a way, failed states. They cannot control their own citizens. We know that both the Zimbabwe economy and the Mozambique economy are falling apart, and they cannot provide jobs for their own people. And now we are going back to a pattern that was familiar before colonial times, and that is people migrating from one area to another area, but this time on other grounds that are more post or modern, more within a modern post-colonial type of environment. And the problem is a weak state phenomenon. The problem is you can negotiate, you can create agreements, but can you execute these agreements? Can you control your own borders? Do you have the capacity? We know about the challenges
the capacity,
South African
the capacity,
police force
Prof,
are facing.
Yeah, the capacity, Prof, for lack of a better word, seems useless. It seems useless because you're having, the numbers are growing on the street. The capacity seems useless, and without, I have to mention that there is significant work that has been done. I'm a journalist, I've been on the ground, I know exactly what kind of work is being done to try and deal with issues regarding the porous borders, for example. But it almost seems useless. Where is the discussions, the main discussions that are supposed to be held about somebody needs to be held to account if there is bloodshed on the ground? Someone needs to be held to account for that. Who is that person?
Well, I don't think it is a person. I think it is a political elite that should be responsible. And as we are a democracy, your responsibility for political decisions ending up at the highest level and that is within the political context. And the problem is political in nature. We know that South Africa, and we have seen the evidence from a number of commissions, are part of a mafia state. Some of these highly influential politicians and others are involved in illegal trade between these countries, opening up the borders at certain time for illegal trade. We know about the tobacco trade coming from Zimbabwe, but there are also other syndicates operating. My take on this is that charity starts at home. We need to get our own order, our state in place and create the necessary capacity. We have the laws, but we do not execute and implement them in a proper way. And we need to keep the politicians in this country responsible for what is going on.
Prof, always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you very much indeed for your insights on this a particular story. I think, there's quite no end to it at this particular stage. We've seen quite a number of the protests on the streets, from South Africans fed up about quite a number of issues and calling on government to intervene. Thank you very much indeed for your insights on that.